Hello, everyone. I wanted to try something new. Um, One of the things that we've been talking a lot in e-learning is how do we personalize the content more? And I think one of the big differences, obviously, between a face-to-face class and an online class is you don't see me that often. And I've been trying to make video announcements to help with that, but in terms of the delivery of the content, I wondered if it would be easier if I started making. Now, I know it's a little too late for you guys, but at least for the next time I teach e-learning, let's try. Sorry, I'm going to move things around a little bit here. So, backlighting. How's that? Okay? Is that better? Okay. Okay, step one. So make sure you actually have your camera set up, figured out before you start recording. We've got that. Okay. Okay. I thought one of the things that might help is actually if I had recordings of the content. So obviously you can read through the content and there is the podcast option to listen to, but I'm going to try this as a slightly more interactive way to deal with the content. And you'll also notice that throughout this video, there are places where I'm pausing and I'm having you actually answer questions or reflect on certain things, and I will be able to see if you have watched the video. So so just bear with me here. So I thought I'd work with what you're currently working on right now, which is writing your essay for Unit 4. And you've got the pre-writing, which is due on Friday if you want some feedback. And I really would encourage you to submit that because feedback is really important if you are looking to improve. Now, so I'm going to go through the content. I'm basically going to read it, and I'll stop and provide some explanations as we go, and we'll give this a shot, okay? At this point, you've read and analyzed 4 different essays, and you've looked at the narrative essay, the persuasive essay, the descriptive essay, and the essay of argument. So now you need to choose one of these essay types and write an essay on the topic of your choice. You need to think carefully about which essay type would be the most effective for communicating a perspective, idea, experience, or belief. As a writer, it's important to choose the appropriate vehicle to communicate our ideas since, as we learned in the previous unit, the medium affects the message. Your audience and purpose will dictate the type of essay that you choose to write. Your purpose, idea, experience, or belief will also determine the type of essay you will write. So ask yourself the following. Are you primarily looking to persuade, entertain, or inform your reader? And do you have a specific audience in mind for your essay? Or are you writing for a broader, more general audience? Your answers to these questions not only help in determining the type of essay that you choose, but also the level of language you should be using in your essay. For example, let's say you wanted to convince your city council to plan to tear down, that their plan to tear down a heritage building in your neighborhood is wrong. So you can choose between an essay of argument or a persuasive essay. However, if you choose an essay of argument, then you can only use logic and reason. If you think some of the reasons for supporting the protection of the heritage building tend to be more subjective, maybe more emotional, then a persuasive essay would be a more appropriate choice. Your level of language should be somewhat formal to convince your audience that you take this issue seriously, but your tone can still be passionate and urgent when you're trying to convince people to act. So that's really one thing that I wanted to get at there is the main difference between an essay of argument and a persuasive essay. Think logos, pathos, and ethos. So if you are writing an essay of argument, logos and ethos all the way. If you're writing a persuasive essay, though, combine that logos and ethos with pathos so that you can use those emotional elements to persuade your reader. Now, on the other hand, maybe you don't need to convince anybody of an important issue. Maybe you just want to convey an image or an event that's important enough to you that you want others to understand your experience. Maybe you want your reader to experience the nostalgia that you feel when remembering a childhood trip to a relative's cottage. Perhaps you wanted to, on the other hand, immerse your reader in a particular experience so that they feel what you felt. So you've got 2 different choices here. You've read 2 different narrative essays. One focused more on descriptive, so like a descriptive essay, that would be On the Road to Berlin. And then the other one focused more on narrating the experience. That was April Fool's on Polar Circus. So you could do either. But again, your level of language is probably going to be somewhat informal unless your subject matter is really serious. So the biggest thing here is trying to remind you that you need to think about the audience and the purpose when it comes to determining which type of essay you're going to write. Now, the writing process. Writing is a process, and I'm sure that we've all been in the situation where we're running behind and we try to write it all in one go. And some of you may have more success with that than others, but I guarantee that all of you would end up with a much better essay if you took it through the full writing process. And that's why I'm really encouraging you to complete the pre-writing process and submit that to me for feedback. So when you're doing your pre-writing, you are brainstorming, you're planning, you're organizing your thoughts, and I don't have a specific way that I want you to do this. You can either use a graphic organizer like a mind map, or maybe you like to do lists, or you might even want to just start writing. For me, that's how I like to get going. I like to start playing around with ideas by writing. But sometimes I go back and forth. So I might start writing, then I might go to a concept map or a mind map, then I might go to some lists, then I might go back and forth. I usually don't plan out the entire essay though, personally. And that's okay if you work the same way or if you work in a different way. One of the things for brainstorming, though, is not to censor yourself, because a so-called bad idea that you might come up with might actually lead to a good idea. And if you censor yourself and prevent yourself from actually even considering that bad idea, you might not get to the good one. When it comes to drafting, good writers know that their best writing comes after multiple drafts where they play with structure, refine ideas, and experiment with words and phrases until they have the best possible way to communicate their ideas. One of the biggest things that I've noticed when marking your persuasive paragraphs is that you guys often struggle to write with clarity. There's a lot of passive voice in your writing. So that would be, for example, saying something like, let me see. A lot of mistakes were made instead of I made mistakes. And that's not a great example because, yes, it's passive voice, but the meaning is still clear. However, when you write in passive voice, especially if your sentence tends to be more complex and longer, if you're writing in passive voice, it actually obscures your meaning. So let me just try and think off the top of my head if I can come up with a better example. If I were to say something like, when studying on the road to Berlin, it can be seen that the writing choices are descriptive because no, okay, I'm failing. But I did start with the it can be seen. And the problem with that is you tend to add more words than you need to your writing, and you're also removing the subject from the sentence, which makes it a lot less clear. So try, instead of thinking about, what's the most scholarly or sophisticated sentence I can write, instead ask yourself, is this the clearest way to express my ideas? And if not, that's where the revision comes in. Revising and editing your writing isn't just about correcting spelling and grammar errors. It's also about making sure that the organization makes sense, making sure that your sentences are clear, that you've chosen the best words to express your ideas. Okay. Now, thesis statement. There's a lot of stuff in here about creating a good thesis statement, and I don't want to read through everything. But I think the biggest point here is number 3. A good thesis shouldn't make the reader say, "So what?" Another way to think of this in an essay of argument or a persuasive essay is your thesis arguable? So if it's unlikely that any reasonable person could argue against your thesis, then what's the point in writing the essay? In a narrative essay or a descriptive essay, this might be a little bit different because you're not trying to prove anything. But you can still avoid the so what factor by ensuring that the thesis you're presenting avoids the obvious. So consider the difference between these two statements. I believe that overcoming hardships makes you a stronger person. While many would expect that the destructive relationship I had with my father might have set me on a path for failure, in actuality, I developed perseverance, compassion, and resilience that led me to my success today. For the record, my relationship with my father is solid. This is totally hypothetical. But do you see the difference there? So one of them is really kind of general, and the other one is a lot more specific. And it's also pointing out the less obvious conclusion that one might draw. Okay? All right. Revision. So I already talked about the fact that when you're revising, it's not just about checking your spelling and grammar, it's also about the ideas. So look for things like, do your paragraphs support your thesis statement? Do your topic sentences make it clear what your paragraph is going to be about? Have you used sufficient support? So pay attention to the different types of proof. You have an activity from the persuasive essay that goes through methods of proof, right? A good pattern to follow, and I emphasize this all the time, is state, illustrate, explain. State your point, illustrate it with a chosen method of proof, and explain how that illustration supports your point. Make sure that your essay has unity and coherence. So if it's coherence, you want to make sure that each paragraph logically follows the previous one. And one of the ways you can help do that is by including transition phrases. But if the content of your paragraph doesn't make sense in terms of following the previous one, then a transition phrase isn't going to do a whole lot of good. That's kind of like slapping a Band-Aid on a really gaping flesh wound. Okay, unity. So you need to make sure that your ideas are not veering away from the parameters that you set out in your thesis. So that's the kind of thing where you may lose track of that in your first draft, and that's okay. That's why you revise, so that when you're revising, you check and see, did I kind of take a detour here, and do I need to get rid of this in order to get my essay back on track? If so, that's when the revision process actually comes in. And then you move on to the proofreading and editing. So once you've got your structure solid, you've got your organization, you've got your unity and coherence, you've made sure that you've adequately addressed your thesis, that's when you go through and you proofread. And I've got a lot of strategies in here for proofreading, including how to proofread for spelling, reading backwards, believe it or not literally like reading the words out loud backwards. So it sounds like, you're revealing the hidden messages in your essay. I just mean that read the last sentence, then read the previous sentence. And the reason why you're doing that is because it will defamiliarize you with the text. Because when we think we already know what we meant to say, we are less likely to catch errors. And then proofread for sentence structure, punctuation, and grammar. I have similar kinds of suggestions. And proofreading for overall meaning. Now read it from the beginning to the ending to check for meaning and flow and correct your errors. Finally, using feedback. If you are the only person who reads your essay, then you are very likely to miss important details because you know what you meant to say. So have someone else read the essay. The way that this activity is set up, we want you to have a peer editor, ideally from this class, but if that's not possible for you, that's okay. But arrange to have somebody else peer edit and revise your work with you so that you have another set of eyes on your paper. So that's all for my very first interactive lecture. I promise I will do better next time. And thank you for your patience. And feel free to laugh at any of the times where I totally lost track of what I was trying to say. Just trying to be real with you all. Okay? Bye-bye.